Of, of course, impatiently. When was it written? 1869, I think. Yes, vivid but not much help. Hostile, if anything. Exactly. Roland sipped his coffee. Maud Bailey reinserted the card into its place in her file. She said, looking into the box, "You must know Fergus Wolfe. He must be at your college, I think." "Oh, yeah. It was Fergus who suggested I should ask you about the mold." A pause. The fingers moved busily, typing. "I know Fergus. I met him at a conference in Paris." A little less crisp, the voice a little less elderly authoritative, he thought unkindly. "He told me," said Roland neutrally, watching for a sign of her consciousness of what Fergus might have said, of how might have spoken. She compressed her lips and stood up. "I'll take you to the resource center." The Lincoln Library could not have been more different from the ash factory. It was a skeletal affair in a glass box, with brilliant doors opening in glass and tubular walls like a box of toys or a giant constructor kit. There were dining metal shelves and fold-folding linen felt carpets, pied piper red and yellow, like the paint on the stair rails and lifts. In summer it must have been bright and baking, but in wet autumn, slate gray sky lay like another box against its repeating panes, in which lines of little round lights were reflected, like Tinker Bell's fairy lights in her Never Never Land. The Women's Archive was housed in a high-walled fish tank. Maud Bailey settled Roland into a tubular chair and a pillow table, like a recalcitrant nursery school child, and put before him various boxes, Medicina 1, Medicina 2, Medicina 3, and 4, Medicina unsigned Breton poems, poems of devotion, mixed lyrics. Blanche, in this box, she showed him a long thick green book, a little like an account book, with sombre marbled in the and papers. A journal of our home life. In our house in Richmond. Blanche Glover. Commenced on the day of our setting up house. May 1st, May Day. 1858. Roland took it up respectfully. It did not have the magnetic feel of the two letters which were folded into his pocket, but it represented the taste of curiosity. He was worried about his day return ticket. He was worried about Maud's limited patience. The journal was written in an excited and pretty hand. In short rushes he skimmed it, carpets, curtains, the pleasures of retirement. Today we engaged a cook general, a new way to stew rhubarb, a painting of the infant Hermes and his mother, and yes, Frank Robinson's breakfast. Here it is. Good. I'll leave you. I'll fetch you when the library shuts. You've got a couple of hours. Thank you. We went out to breakfast with Mr. Robinson, a pleasant but prosy old gentleman who told us a complicated tale of a bust of Wieland retrieved by himself from unworthy oblivion, to the great delight of Goethe and other literary eminences. Not much of interest was said, and certainly not by shadowy me. Though that is as I would have it, present were Mrs. Jameson, Mr. Bagehot, Ash the poet without Mrs. Ashe, who was indisposed, and some young members of the London Library. The Princess was much admired, and rightly. She spoke great good sense to Mr. Ashe, whose poetry I cannot like, though she professed to like it greatly, which naturally flattered him. He lacks, in my view, the lyrical flow and intensity of Alfred Tennyson, and I doubt his seriousness. His poem about Mesmer is a great puzzle to me. I can't tell with any certainty what is his attitude to animal magnetism, whether mocking or endorsing, and this is so with other of his work, so that often one is led to wonder whether there is not a great pother of talk about nothing much. For my part, I endure a long disquisition on the Tractarians from an opinionated university liberal. He would have been much surprised to know my true opinion on these matters, but I did not choose to let him be so much familiar. I kept my and smiled and nodded as best I might, keeping my thoughts to myself, but I was most glad when Mr. Robinson decided to tell the company at large of his Italian journey with Wordsworth, who desired to be back at home with every step they made, and could only with the utmost difficulty be persuaded to look about him. I too desired to be at home. I was glad when we were able to close our own dear front door behind us, and be gathered into the silence of our little parlour. A home is a great thing, as I had not courage to say to Mr. Robinson. If it is certainly one's own home, as our little house is, when I think of my previous existence, of all I thought I could reasonably expect of the rest of my life, an allowed place at the extreme corner of someone's drawing-room carpet, a servant's garret or no better, I give thanks for every little thing, which is unspeakably dear to me. We had a late luncheon cold fowl, and a salad got up by Lisa, walked in the park in the afternoon, worked, and in the evening had a dish of warm milk and white bread, sprinkled with sugar, quite as Wordsworth himself might have done. We played and sang together, and read aloud a little of Fairy Queen. Our days weaved together the simple pleasures of daily life, which we should never take for granted, and the higher pleasures of art and thought, which we may now taste as we please, with none to forbid or criticize. Surely Richmond is Beulah. I said to the Princess, who said it was only to be hoped, not wicked, very envious as our pleasant lot. Nothing further for 3.5 weeks except simple meals, walks and readings, music and Blanche's plans for paintings. Then Roland found a sentence which could have been something or nothing, nothing if you were not looking carefully. I have been wondering whether to attempt in oils a subject from Malory, the imprisoning of Merlin, maybe by the damsel Nimue, or solitary maid of Astolat. My brain is filled full of vague images, but no clear visions of one necessary thing. I have sketched oak trees in Richmond Park all week. All my lines are two-lined for the thick solidity of their girths. What draws us to make pretty what should express brute power? Nemu or Lily Maid would require a model, and a princess can hardly be asked for so much of her time. Though I hope she may think time spent on Christabel before Sir Leoline was not wholly wasted. I paint so thinly as though my work were stained glass that requires a flood of light from beyond behind to illuminate and enliven. And there is no beyond and behind. Oh, what? Oh, I want force. She has had Christabel in her bedroom, where it catches the morning sun and shows up my perfections. She much exercised about the long letter which arrived today, which she did not show me, but smiled over and cut up and folded away. There was nothing at all, except Rowan's own need, and concern to suggest that the long letter might be his own letter. It could have been any letter, had there been more. 3 weeks later, he found another meaningless sentence. Liza and I have been busy with our apple and quince jelly. The kitchen is filled and festooned in dripping jelly muslin, ingeniously cut up amongst the legs of inverted chairs, like spider webs. Liza burned her tongue, testing whether it would set or not, and being too greedy to taste or anxious to please. Liza is greedy. I'm sure she consumes bread and fruit in the middle of the night. Coming down to breakfast, I found raw, slanting cuts I never made on the loaf in the crock. The princess did not help us this year. She was getting her literary letters ready to post, though she denies this, and she was hurrying to finish the glass coffin for the book of tales. I believe she's writing fewer poems. Certainly she doesn't show me them of an evening as we were used to do. All this correspondence is detrimental to her true gifts. She is in no real need of epistolary adulation. She knows her own worth. I only wish I were sure of mine. 2 weeks later, letters, letters, letters. Not for me. I'm not meant to see or know. I know blind Moldiwar, my lady, no well-trained lady's maid, to turn my head and not see. What is stated not to concern me. You need not hurry them away to lie in your sewing basket, or run upstairs to fold them under your handkerchiefs. I am no sneak, no watcher, no governess. A governess is what I most surely not. From that fate you rescued me, and you shall never for one moment, one little moment, suppose me ungrateful or making claims. 2 weeks later, so now we have a prowler. Something is ranging and snuffing round our small retreat, trying the shutters and huffing and puffing inside the door. In all days that put mountain ash berries and a cast horseshoe over the lintel of frightened away the fairy folk. I shall nail some up now, to prevent passage. If I may, Dog Tray is nervous of prowlers. His hackles go up on his shoulders, as a wolf would when he hears a hunter. He gnashes the empty air. How very small, how very safe is that threatened dwelling. How large the logs seem, how appalling would be their forcing and splintering. 2 weeks later, where is our frankness of intercourse? Where are the small unspeakable things we used to share in the quiet harmony? This peeping Tom has put his eye to the nick of cranny in our walls and peers shamelessly. She laughs and says he means no harm, and is incapable of seeing the essential things we know and keep safe. And so it is, so it must be, so it must always be. But it amuses her to hear him laughing and panting round our solid walls. She thinks he will always be tame. As he is now, I cannot claim to know better. I know nothing, know very much. But I fear for her. I asked her how much writing she had lately done, and she laughed and said she had learned so much, so very much, and when it was all learned, she should have a new matter to write about, and many things to say. And she kissed me, and called me her dear Blanche, and said I knew she was a good girl, and very strong, and not foolish. I said we were all foolish, and in need of divine strength to help us out when we were weak. She said she had never so much felt its presence, its immediacy, as lately I went up to my bedchamber, and prayed as I have not prayed from desolation since I have prayed to leave Mrs. Tipp's house, and thought I should never be answered. The candle flame ran huge shadows like grasping fingers across the ceiling in the dark. I could put some such running, grasping lines of light, and shadow around Nimue and Merlin. She came in to me as I knelt there and raised me up, and said we must never quarrel, and that she would never ever give me cause to doubt her, and I must not suppose she could. I'm sure she meant what she said. She was agitated. There were a few tears. We were quiet together in our special ways for a long time. Next day, the wolf was gone from the dog trays. Hers is own. I have begun on the Lily Maid of Astolat, which certainly seemed best. This writing ended indeed. The book ended abruptly, not even at the end of the year. Rowan wondered if there were other diaries. He put little slips of paper in the entries that made up his fragile narrative and non-narrative. There was no evidence to connect the prowler with the letter writer or the letter writer with Randall Harry Ashe, and yet he felt a powerful conviction that all three were one and the same. If they were, would not Blanche have said so? He must ask more Bailey about the prowler, yet now how could he do so without coming clean in some way about his own interest in the matter, and exposing himself to that censorious and supercilious gaze? Maud Bailey put her head round the door. Libraries. Closing. Did you find anything? I think so. It may be all in my own head. There are things I need to ask someone new. Is it permitted to photocopy the manuscripts? I simply haven't had time to copy out what I found. You seem to have had a profitable afternoon. Dryly. Then a concession. Exciting, even. I don't know. The whole thing is a wild goose chase. If I can help, said Maud, having packed away Blanche's pages into their box, I shall be only too happy. Let's have coffee. There's an SCR coffee place. I shall be only too happy. Let's have a coffee. Place in the women's studies block. Am I allowed in? Naturally, said the frigid voice. They sat down at the low table in the corner, under a poster for the campus crèche. I'm facing posters for the pregnancy advisory service. A woman has the right to decide about her own body. We put women first. And a feminist review. Come and see the sorceresses, the vamps, the daughters of Kali, the Fatih Morgana. Will make your blood run cold and make you laugh on the sinister side of your face at women's wit and wickedness. The room was largely uninvited. A group of women in jeans were laughing in the opposite corner, and two girls were in earnest conversation by the window. Pink, spiky heads leaning together. Maud Bailey's excessive elegance was even odder in this context. She was a most untouchable woman. Roland, who had desperately decided to gamble on showing her the xeroxes of the letters, who wanted secrecy and privacy, was forced to lean forward in a kind of pseudo-intimacy and speak low. You know, this prowler Blanche Lover got so worried about. Is anything known about him? The wolf at the door? Nothing certain. I think Leonora Stern has made a tentative identification with a young Mr. Thomas Hirst of Richmond, who liked to come and play the oboe with the ladies. They were both accomplished pianists. There do exist 2 or 3 letters from Christabel to Hirst. She even sent him a few poems in one, which he kept fortunately for us. He married someone else in 1860 and drops out the picture. Blanche may have made up the problem. She had a vivid imagination and was jealous. Of course. And the literary letters she refused to? Is it known who they were from? Or if they were connected to the prowler? Not as far as I know. She had abundant letters from people like Coventry Patmore, who admired her sweet simplicity and noble resignation. Lots of people wrote. It could be anyone. You think it's R.H. Ashe? No, I think I'd better show you what I have. He brought out the photocopies of his 2 letters. While she was unfolding them, he said, I should explain. I found this. I haven't shown them to anyone else. No one knows they exist. She was reading. Why? I don't know. I kept them to myself. I don't know why. She finished reading. Well, she said, the dates fit. You could make up a whole story on no real evidence. It would change all sorts of things. The Maud scholarship, even ideas about Melusina. The fairy topic, it's intriguing. Isn't it? It would change Ashe's scholarship, too. His letters are really rather boring, correct and distant really. This is quite different. Where are the originals? Roland hesitated. He needed help. He needed to speak. I took them, he said. I found them in a book and then I took them. I didn't think about it. I just took them. Why? Stern, but much more animated. Why did you? Because they were alive. They seemed urgent. I felt I had to do something. It was an impulse, quick as flash. I meant to pop them back. I will. Next week. I just haven't yet. I don't think they are mine, or anything, but they aren't Cropper's or Blackadder's or Lord Hash's either. They seemed private. I'm not explaining very well. Gossip. No, I suppose they might represent a considerable academic scoop for you. Well, I wanted to be the one who does the work. Roland began innocently, and then saw how he had been insulted. Wait a minute! It wasn't like that at all. Not like that. It was some personal. You wouldn't know. I'm an old-fashioned textual critic, not a biographer. I do not go in for this sort of things. It wasn't profit. I'll put them back next week. I wanted them to be a secret, private, and to do the work. She blushed. Red blood stained the ivory. I'm sorry, I don't know why it should be. It was quite a reasonable assumption, and I can't begin to imagine how anyone would dare to whip two manuscripts like that out of sight. I'd never have the nerve. But I do see you weren't thinking in these terms. I do really. I just wanted to know what happened next. I can't let you Xerox Blanche Diary. The spy won't stand it, but you can copy it out and go and hunt it through those boxes. Who knows what you'll find next? No one was hunting for Randall Henry Ashe after all. Can I book you a guest room until tomorrow? Roland thought. A guest room seemed infinitely attractive. A quiet place where he could sleep without Val and think about Ashe and take himself at his own pace. A guest room would cost money he hadn't got. Also, there was a day return.